I want to connect how each of us, the way we live our lives, connects to the larger global picture of warming and its consequences. James Hansen was NASA's chief scientist and was primarily responsible for gathering the data that showed the warming of the Earth. And he was actually an Iowa graduate. Last week we talked about the whole issue of global warming, and there are two main facts from last week that I think would be a takeoff point for this week. And these are that global warming is caused by atmospheric gases, mainly carbon dioxide. After carbon dioxide, the two other powerful atmospheric warming gases are methane and nitrous oxide. Here's a statistic. We all look at Ethiopia and we all have these kids that are starving, and it's a terrible, terrible, terrible situation, right? Okay? If an alien came and looked at this data, they would think human beings were completely stupid. Because look at this data. There are 80 million people in Ethiopia. They consume 11 million tons of food, okay, per year. There are 43 million livestock consuming 100 million tons of food. They're feeding the cattle 10 times as much as they're eating themselves. For what? But cattle is their currency. Okay, so they're starving, but they're feeding the cattle. We must be the change that we want to see in the world. If you think about carrying capacity of the Earth can support 15 billion people, okay, but not at the current consumption levels. Population is a problem, but it's a sort of localized problem. For example, in the United States, population is not a problem. Definitely in China and India, it is a problem. So it's more localized. The sort of global issues that we're dealing with hinges more on consumption patterns rather than population itself. So, for example, the world population has grown by a factor of 16 over the last century, something like that, while consumption has grown by a factor of 64. There are 1 billion starving people on the planet, but there are also 1 billion people who are living on calorie intake that's much higher than what one should. So you see so it's a distribution problem. It's not so much a population problem as it is. If I had another lecture, instead of talking about population, I would talk about spirituality. Not narrow spirituality, but broad spirituality, humanistic spirituality. Because of all the books that I've ever read trying to get my head around this human problem that we face, of all the people that I've read, the one that makes sense is, I don't know if anybody's read Ernst Schumacher, more popularly known as Fritz Schumacher, actually, E.F. Schumacher. He has some of books that were really excellent books. And the books, one of them is called Small is Beautiful, and the subtitle is Economics as if People Mattered. Okay. And the other one is called Guide for the Perplexed. Okay, you see what I'm getting at. Okay, these are titles that hit exactly on where I am. Like all of you, right? I mean, I'm sure your first question to me in the first lecture was, what is the solution? Right? Clearly, I don't. If I had a solution, I would not be here. Schumacher actually puts his finger very, very nicely on the issue. And this is not an issue that Schumacher alone talks about. I mean, this is an issue that, Gandhi talked about. And, you go back and you can hear the voice of Christ, you can hear Socrates talking about it, you can hear the Buddha talking about it in 600 BC, all of them addressing the same problem. This is a metaphysical problem. You go back to the Bible and the story of the Garden of Eden and the forbidden fruit, and it's in there. That is the problem. Right? The problem is that we have a metaphysical crisis. And the crisis stems, according to Schumacher, from a very, very fundamental, incorrect assumption that the universe, or at least the Earth, is infinite and it's meant for us to exploit. That is an incorrect, it's a folly. That's a forbidden fruit, it's a folly. In the East, we call it the Maya principle. Okay, we are all under the illusion that we can have whatever we want. That is a fundamental impossibility. And even in science, that's encapsulated within what is called the second law of thermodynamics. Right? The faster you want, the bigger you want things, the faster you want to do stuff, the more waste you generate and you kill yourself with it. Okay, so that is a fundamental problem. And that is only addressed on the level of spirituality. It is not addressed by science. It is not addressed by rational thought. It is addressed by a personal spirituality, by which I mean a very deep analysis of self-awareness and understanding that we are a part of something much bigger and that we have to respect that. Right? So that's the idea. And nobody puts it, and Schumacher was an excellent economist. And he worked with John Maynard Keynes, for instance. He was that high up as an economist. And he checked out eventually and said, this is all nonsense, because it violates that fundamental principle of not understanding our place in the universe and not having humility. It all goes down to the meek shall inherit the earth. Eventually, either we shall be meek or we shall be made meek. And that's the message that I don't know how to tell that to my students, because clearly I'm teaching a class on engineering and science. I cannot talk about spirituality. But there is no getting out of this problem unless we think about spirituality. Okay, spirituality in the sense of what the Native Americans talked about, which is leaving the earth for the 7th generation after us, behaving in that fashion. And clearly we are not. So I'm sure all of you have thoughts on this. Right? I mean, you probably all have, like me, passed through stages of life where you've re-examined your fundamental axioms upon which we live. Okay? If we haven't re-examined our fundamental axioms, then we have actually, like Bertrand Russell says, it's not a life worth living, and an unexamined life. So clearly, I can't expect my kids in undergraduate class to have done that, but I'm sure all of us have done that at some point or the other. And the true meaning is always discovered in sort of where the truth rests, which is at the intersection of all spiritual thought. Okay? Not one stream or the other or whatever, but if you really take the sum total, and this is what Schumacher says, if you take the sum total of all of humanity's spiritual thought, the truth lies in it. And it lies in our inability to comprehend our place in the universe. Okay. So that is a much more sort of overarching theme that I wanted to cover in connecting the dots. But I will leave with a more mundane analysis of an energy future. Okay. So connecting the dots, which is about fueling the future in the shadow of climate change. Okay. And this is a very nuts and bolts thing. Okay, there's really nothing here that is, I would say, sort of above the realm of rational thought or of numbers. Okay, there's purely an area of numbers, and so it's easily addressed. So, what do I mean by fueling the future under the shadow of climate change? I've pointed out in the past that if you look at why we are in the predicament that we are in at the moment, it is because of this graph here. This is our fossil fuel consumption starting somewhere in the 1850s up until today. And clearly it's taken an exponential, it's an exponential curve. Those kinds of curves are exponential curves, okay? So it's an exponential curve, and because we have emitted carbon dioxide primarily, but also methane and nitrous oxide into the atmosphere, we have, this is showing you the temperature record. So this is a temperature record, and the temperature record has gone hand in hand with the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, correct? So this is the fundamental problem, because anytime we burn a fossil fuel, whether it's wood or whether it's oil or natural gas or coal, we are adding carbon dioxide to the atmosphere, okay? So deforestation is here. So this is the contribution of deforestation to that. Okay, to the fossil fuel record. Okay, so both of them hand in hand have contributed to warming. Okay, the fact that we have no forests left to absorb the carbon dioxide. But I want to actually look at the emitters gallery, as I call it. Okay, how much contribution to these emissions have different regions made, okay, over time. So if you look at the greenhouse gas pollution, this is tons of carbon dioxide emitted per year per person. So it's a per capita. Okay. So if you look at this is North America, which is Canada and the United States. Okay, and this is Australia and New Zealand. All right. So and then you look at Europe, and this is Asia. This is China and India, pretty much. Okay. So while the area under this block is a total emission, right? So China actually has, in terms of total emissions, China exceeds the United States. Okay, but per capita, the United States is about emits 4 times as much per person as China does. Okay, so that is what this and so does Australia. Australia is fairly close. Actually, Australia right now maybe even closer, right there. Okay, but Canada and the United States are number 1 in per capita emissions. So the question is, why is this the case? Is it that we are living 4 times better, or at least twice as well as somebody in Europe, or let's say in Switzerland, for instance? Okay, so Switzerland has half the emissions of the United States, but its per capita income is actually higher than the United States, okay, by a factor of 1.5 or so, right? So they have a very high standard of living, but they emit half as much as we do. The point is that somehow we need to address that issue there. And so let's see how. So the conventional notion is that if you want to have a high standard of living, that we should be using a lot of energy, and therefore we get a lot of emissions, right? So there's a one-to-one correlation between all of that. To some extent, that is true. Okay. So if you look at this graph here, this is GDP per capita. Okay. So this is the standard. Think about this as a standard of living. This axis. So if you're higher on this number, then you have a higher standard of living. Think about this as power consumption. So if you are higher here, you consume more power, right? So let's look at a few countries on this map here. So there's the United States, high standard of living, and that's where we are on power consumption. You will find other countries. For example, that one there is Iceland. Okay, very, very high power consumption, but actually a little lower standard of living than the United States. Okay, and then there are other ones. For example, Kuwait, extremely high power consumption. They have, of course, a lot of oil, so they can burn it. Okay, Iceland actually, they're out there, but they actually have an incredible amount of geothermal power. Right. Okay, which is non-polluting. So they have a lot of power that comes from the ground heating of the ground, and they're very near what is called the ring of fire. So there's a lot of ground heat that they can exploit. Okay, and then you take a look at this is the Netherlands. So Netherlands is out here. It's got a fairly high standard of living, but it's out there. And then there's Hong Kong, which is even lower in terms of power consumption, but has a fairly high standard of living. So you can think, things are all over the map, right? You can be at pretty much the same standard of living, but you can be way up there, or you can be here, or you can be down here. What accounts for this difference? So this is something we go through in my class, in my energy systems class. So thinking about this particular graph, it's a very important graph. And I ask my students to think, what is it that makes a particular place with a certain standard of living have a much higher energy profile than other places? Okay. So there are some fairly straightforward answers if you look at this curve. So first thing is that cold countries tend to have a lot more energy consumption than warm countries, okay, hot countries. For example, Canada and the United States have very high energy consumption. Iceland has very high energy consumption because they have to heat their homes and so on and so forth. And that's the first thing that comes out. The second thing that comes out is very hot countries also have very high energy consumption. There's Bahrain, UAE, and Kuwait. So basically, they're cooling, air conditioning themselves a lot. So heating and air conditioning lead to very, very high energy consumption. Okay. If you look at Hong Kong, so what is the magic with Hong Kong? If you think about Hong Kong actually has a fairly equitable weather. Okay. Plus, Hong Kong is a vertical. It's pretty much a city, more or less, and it's vertical. It's not horizontal. Okay. So for them, and also public transportation is huge in Hong Kong. Okay. So all of that accounts for a much lower energy consumption profile. Okay. So if you think about the United States, United States energy consumption is split about one third for transportation, 1/3 for heating and cooling of buildings, and 1/3 for an industry and production. Okay, so that's how we are split pretty much. Okay, so you can think that transportation is in the United States is huge because most of our transportation is road transportation. Okay, for example, we don't have a very good train network, which Europe does. Right, they have very, very fast, efficient trains, and trains are incredible as far as efficiency goes. In fact, a fully packed train is as efficient per passenger mile as riding a bike. You got that last statement that I made, right? Okay, a fully occupied train is as efficient as riding a bicycle. Okay, in terms of energy. All right, it's something that is completely lacking in our energy profile. Okay, instead we fly, and flying is one of the most expensive or energy consuming modes of transportation. The only thing that is actually much more energy consuming than flying is going by ship. Okay, one of those large ships. They are very bad. So you see the choices we make in our transportation profile, naturally, because we have an incredible interstate highway network, we end up driving everywhere. Let me give you another example of what we do that leads to our high energy consumption. The way we plan our cities, and I hope Scott Spack will talk about this when he comes, because he does city planning. If you are in Paris and you want to get groceries, you walk down from your apartment and walk a block and you get your groceries, right? It's not, if you go to Paris, it's not, it's very, in fact, it's the norm that you will see people walking around with baguettes in their hands. So they've just gone to their neighborhood grocery store and gotten the baguette, okay? While if I want to get a baguette, I need to drive or take a bike or head somewhere off for a couple, 2-3 miles. Hopefully it will co-op. If I want to go elsewhere, then I have to drive even farther. So if you want to go to, for example, Walmart, which is the biggest supplier of food in this country. Walmart is, okay, it is Walmart. And so you have to, drive all the way. And where does the food in Walmart come from? It comes from who knows where. Actually, who knows where, you don't know where the food comes from. But it basically comes from all over the world. And it's transported from who knows. But the co-op is no better. Last year I was shocked. I picked up an apple on a co-op and I said, New Zealand. It came from New Zealand. The amount of energy, I did the calculation in my class, the amount of energy that it took to transport the apple to the co-op from New Zealand is 100 times the amount of energy embedded in that apple. Does this make sense? What is wrong with human beings? I said, my God, this is the co-op, this is not even Walmart. It shocks me. Doesn't it shock you that in just a simple analysis, just take it. I made my students do this calculation. I said, you know what? Get in your car and drive to your nearest grocery store and get a bar of granola bar. Get a granola bar and eat it. the amount of energy you expended in going to the grocery store and getting a granola bar is orders of magnitude. This is like, I don't know, thousands of times greater than the energy in that granola bar provided you. Yeah. So the choices we make, transportation is 1/3 of energy cost. I'm pointing out a fundamental quandary we land in when we stop thinking about where things come from, right? Local consumption, and it's sort of a whole snowballing effect, because what we have done is we have committed to a way of living that relies on things being produced, God knows where, by who knows who, what. Okay, I was listening to NPR a couple days ago, and this is what happens, and people are shocked when they see this. So they asked the airline, we fly all the time, and we assume that our aircraft are safe, right? And I'm very scared of flying, because I got all my degrees in aerospace engineering, so I have a PhD in that. And I know all the stuff that can go wrong with this thing, okay? And I also taught the people who designed these things, so I'm like, oh my goodness, that guy went on to, oh my goodness, I shouldn't be flying. But they pointed out that the airline industry now has so outsourced and subcontracted the work that they don't even know where the aircraft components are coming from. So there is apparently some aircraft components that are made of composite materials that are flying today, okay, that were made in a surfboard manufacturing outfit in California. Okay. They don't have a clue who is making these things. Okay. So we don't have a clue where our food is coming from. Okay. And clearly, that means that they are being transported miles and miles and miles and miles, and that accounts for a lot of cost. Okay. So this is a very, very telling graph of why we are here. And this is a challenge I give my students. I say, can you take the United States? We want to take it down here. Okay, can we take it down by 50%? Is this possible? And they say, oh no, it's not possible. In fact, it is irresponsible not to get there. I'll show you why with some numbers later. If you look at what happened here, this is where we are, right? This is what it was like in the 15th century. Our energy came from biomass, burning wood and stuff, and animals, okay? And only in the 19th century that you see this part, which is coal, correct? Coal started in England, they started to mine coal and use it, and that led to England becoming a colonizing power, and all that kind of stuff, right? So the Industrial Revolution, right? Starting from here, James Watt, 1770, steam engine invention, okay? The loom for producing textiles, all of that stuff, right? Powered looms, all of that, okay? 20th century, the early 20th century, you see that all of this stuff has shrunk, and now you're talking about mostly coal and a little bit of oil, right? So in Pennsylvania, the initial oil strikes were in the end of the 19th century, right? And then oil started in the Model T, all of that stuff using oil, all of that started coming out at that point. Now this is the late 20th century, so this is what it was, where we are. Actually, we are still here. So most of our energy comes from oil, some from coal, and some from natural gas. And this is the sort of what I had, let's say a couple years ago, or maybe 3-4 years ago, I was showing this as where we would be, okay? And you can see here where we were supposed to be by 2050, okay? So coal was supposed to pretty much go away, correct? Oil, natural gas, quite a bit, natural gas had expanded. Biomass, which is biofuels, and this is hydrogen. Hydrogen, fuel cells. I don't know if you heard of hydrogen fuel cells. So the idea was that instead of powering ourselves with fossil fuels, we'd power ourselves with hydrogen, correct? And because if you have carbon dioxide and you have a carbonaceous matter and you're burning it in oxygen, you get carbon dioxide, which is the gas that is warming us, right? But if you burn hydrogen, so hydrogen and oxygen gives you water. And people said, there are no carbon dioxide emissions, hydrogen is the way to go. So the Bush administration actually put in billions of dollars in hydrogen research. Okay, and actually there are hydrogen-powered cars. Okay, so you can actually put just hydrogen in it, and just steam comes out of the back, and there's no pollution, zero pollution. What is the main problem with hydrogen? The whole infrastructure has to change, and hydrogen is a gas. It has very low density, so if you store, oil is very high density, so you can store this much oil and release energy. Hydrogen, you have to store a lot to release energy, so the tanks have to be highly pressurized and all that stuff, and so all of that stuff. And then the flammability, right? People think of Hindenburg, but there is an even more severe problem. And that is why the whole enterprise failed. There is no hydrogen. It takes more energy to break water than hydrogen will produce. So there is no hydrogen. Okay, and that is the fundamental problem why hydrogen is not a viable. So we can completely take that out. Ethanol has serious problems. One of the serious problems that ethanol has that people don't recognize is that so ethanol comes from corn, which means that you have to basically you're basically put chemical fertilizers in, and it causes the Gulf of Mexico dead zone. Plus, the amount of energy that ethanol produces is 1.3 times the amount of energy you put in to grow ethanol. So you're only getting a little bit extra, okay? And it's by no means zero carbon, even though they say it's zero carbon. So ethanol is, all forms of biofuels are at best going to be fringe contributors to our energy. Plus they take away from the food supply and they take away from water supplies, both of which we're going to run short of. So, and they take immense amounts of land area. There's a very interesting TED talk by a speaker called McKay, M-C-K-A-Y. I recommend that because he points out that one of the problems with biofuels and ethanol in particular is that you need too much extremely high land area to grow ethanol to power yourself. If you want to use ethanol in all the cars in Iowa City, you will need the entire Johnson County area to grow corn. So I want to talk about where we are. Unfortunately, this is not, the font is kind of weird. So, but in any case, where we are now is fossil fuels, right? That dominates our landscape. So why fossil fuels? Why do we use these things? Well, fundamentally, we use it because fossil fuels store a lot of energy. Okay, so the idea is that 1 pound of fossil fuel, of coal in particular, so this was supposed to say 1 pound of coal yields energy equivalent to the work of 300 horses. You take 1 pound of coal and burn it, okay, you have derived as much energy as running 300 horses. Okay, and 300 pounds of coal produce as much energy as one human being over an entire lifetime. So because of that, because of the fact that they derive so much power, they provide so much power, the fossil fuels, you can see what happened, right? This is where the world was in the 1900s, and this is how the energy basically took off, okay, right? This is oil and coal and all that stuff, immense amounts of power. It enabled us to build what we have today. Without these sources, we wouldn't basically be where we are today, correct? I mean, we wouldn't be able to do transportation like we do, or we wouldn't have aircraft running around. So the whole thing is made feasible by them. And it all started, of course, in 1770 when James Watt's steam engine, right here, and then you can see the whole thing built up, okay, to where it is now. So what is the current situation? If you think about how nations derive their energy, I want to show you two pictures, USA and China. Okay, and let me point out the most significant thing you want to see in this graph here. It's the green part. Okay, so the United States derives 25% of its energy from coal. China derives 70% of its energy from coal. China is building coal power plants at the rate of 1 per week. 1 per week to power itself. And they have a ton of coal. They have tons of coal. So they have coal that will last them for over 200 years. So they're not going to stop because that's very cheap source of power, okay, and very effective source of power, right? So that's something that we need to keep in mind, okay. And the 14% growth rate is all about this. If you look at the this is not good again. I'm sorry, the fonts all got messed up. But if you look at between 2007, so in 2007-2009 period, if you look at the change in fossil fuel in carbon dioxide emissions, how much carbon dioxide was put into the atmosphere, what the contributors were. Don't worry about the numbers. I just want to show you. This bar is China, okay, and this bar is India. So between India and China, 92% of the growth of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere was contributed by India and China in that 2-year period. The United States actually, this is the United States, is negative. The United States actually decreased its contribution in that period, okay? Mainly because the economy started going down and manufacturing went to China. We're letting them do the dirty work, and this shows you how. See, this is CO2 fluxes embodied in trade, okay? So how much CO2 is being shipped around, right? How much stuff is being shipped around, how much pollution is being shipped around. And if you look at the main pollution producers, it is the United States, Russia, China, the Middle East, okay, and Europe, okay, and South Africa there, okay. And you look at where the pollution is going from China, that's being shipped to the United States. Because all the production is in China, right? So, and they use coal to produce whatever we want. All the stuff we want that we get in Walmart is produced and shipped to us. Okay, that's just what it is, right? And also China sends it to China sends it to Europe, and China sends it to Japan. Okay. So it's being basically all their contribution to CO2 is because of that. So that's sort of the current picture. So where do we go from here? Clearly, as I said, we are in the shadow of climate change, which means that we should not really be adding CO2 to the atmosphere anymore, because already the CO2 is warming the Earth to such an extent that it's going to be beyond the tipping point in terms of how much warming can be allowed. So what are the best practices? How can we change this trajectory? So if you look at, I don't know if you have followed the Rio Plus 20. So Rio Plus 20 just took place last week, right? It's a sort of the 20 years after the Rio summit, where all countries met to recognize that climate change was happening and determined to do something about it. Main thing is, well, there are strategies. Okay, the conclusion is that there are only two ways to do this. First, we need to use less energy, which means we have to improve our efficiency of machines and buildings and blah, blah, blah. So we have to improve efficiency and we have to consume less. You mention consume less to a politician and they fall off there, right? Because consume less implies in their mind that you can never hit 4% growth rate in the economy. If you don't hit 4% growth rate, you will not get elected. Continual growth is a chimera. There cannot be continual growth. And there is a adage that anybody who expects infinite growth in a finite world is either an economist or insane. So, but most of us, we want if we don't see that 4% growth rate number, then we never elect somebody. And this is the problem. And I don't blame President Obama, because I'm sure he also has, faces these kinds of pressures, right? We put the pressures, however. Okay, we blame the government, we blame this and that, but we expect this. So the idea is that we have to do these two things. And the other thing is, well, we need to start generating energy from renewable sources. Okay, so that's the main sort of message that comes out of all of this stuff. So let's look at efficiency. Let's look at efficiency and how the United States is doing on efficiency. I said, right? First thing, let's be more efficient. Okay. And second thing is, let's go to renewables. Okay, so I want to talk about the challenges in doing those two things. So if you look at efficient energy use in the United States, these are the sources of energy. Natural gas is about 25%, petroleum is about 25%, coal is about 15%. So all of that goes in, and then the energy is used to produce electricity. It's used for household and commercial use, right? Heating, cooling, all of that. Transportation and industry, okay? And now all of that comes out, and then in 1975, the useful energy of all the energy put in, how much energy came out as useful energy? So about 32%. It's energy that does not go out as heat. Just kind of, but let me give you an example. In a car, right? In your automobile, right? In an automobile. In an automobile, it's about, the efficiency of an automobile is about 10%, in the sense that taking out all of the stuff, noise, vibration, drag, heat, all of that stuff, only about 10% of the fuel you put in actually goes to run and move your car. The rest is just lost, okay? Now, it depends on which model you're doing. If you're driving a bigger car, then it's even worse. Even more important fact, if you're sitting in the car alone, right, by yourself and you're driving, what percentage of all the energy that you put into the car in terms of fuel is actually used to move you? 0.05% is used to move you. The rest of that 10% is used to move the car. So that's what I mean by efficiency, you see. A standard power plant, the one that's sitting on the river there, you put in a ton of coal or whatever you want in it, okay? In their case, they use boat hulls and all this other fancy stuff, and natural gas. So that power plant, the measured efficiency of that power plant is about 33%. So of all the energy you put in, only 33% comes out in the form of whatever you want, electricity, running this gadget, that gadget, and so on and so forth. Okay, right? The rest of it is lost as heat, and this is a fundamental thing. There's nothing you or I can do to change that. This is a fundamental principle of thermodynamics, that only a certain fraction will come out, and the rest will. The universe has designed it so that the rest will become heat. Okay, so now if you take a look at what comes out of useful energy, it was in 1975, 32% comes out of useful energy. The rest of that is gone. Let's see what the picture is in 2001 in the United States. So the useful energy in the United States is about 35%, came out as 35% in 2001. So there's a slight uptick, right, of useful energy in the United States. So efficiency improvements are only marginal. You see what I mean? Right? Efficiency improvements are at best marginal. Okay. Let me give you an example of automobiles. In 30 years, the transmission efficiency of automobile, the actual automobile efficiencies, went up by a factor of 20-30%. Okay, depending on what kind of. So it was quite a large efficiency improvement. But that didn't impact the miles per gallon, because people started driving heavier vehicles.
Yeah.
Okay, so when efficiencies improve, people say, I can get more now. So that's why efficiency doesn't really change the whole picture. Electric cars. I used to be skeptical of electric cars, right? For the following reason. People assume that electric cars, somehow the electricity comes for free, right? It does not come for free. Electricity comes from a power plant that is hopefully not burning coal. Okay, so in that sense, I was skeptical of electric cars. But actually, people have done some in-depth analysis, and it turns out that even if you include all of that, the entire life cycle, this is called life cycle analysis, right? From the power plant all the way to your home, not just your electric car alone. If you do that entire life cycle analysis, electric cars are still more efficient than fossil fuel cars. I would say about 10% more efficient. Okay? So it is significant. 10% efficiency is nothing, small. It is significant. For example, in the cash for clunkers thing, eventually the energy saved by the more efficient cars, turns out that in replacing the old cars with these new cars, more energy was spent in producing these new cars than would be gained back by running these new cars. So in energy choices, this is supposed to be non-renewable. So non-renewables are choices that are oil, natural gas, and coal, and this is the dangerous stuff that we want to phase out. And nuclear is non-renewable, right? Because nuclear fuel, there's only so much of uranium that you have on Earth. If Earth had any more uranium, we'd all be toast, right? So uranium has to be mined, and there's not that much of it. So it's not like we're going to have uranium forever. So that's non-renewable, okay? And once it's spent, it's gone. In fact, the problem is that once it's spent, you don't know what to do with it. So you stick it in a mountain and hope that it doesn't, burn anybody. So, or you send it to, Somalia or someplace, which is what happens. So that's non-renewable actually. But I'm still in favor of nuclear. So now in renewables we have these, okay, as potential sources. And the story is, of course, that there's something called peak oil, and that oil is not renewable. So eventually it's going to die out, depending on who you ask. If you ask the oil companies, another 200 years. If you ask other people, well, another 50 years. Okay, so the range of when they will disappear is quite large, but there is a horizon. Okay, and we might already be past peak oil. So now, coal, of course, is going to last for 1,000 years. Yes, there's enough coal in the United States for another 1,000 years, and there's enough coal in China for another 1,000 years, and in Russia for equal amount. So coal is abundant. Now, the coal gets dirtier and dirtier and dirtier. There are different kinds of coal, okay? And the coal, for example, that is used in India is one of the dirtiest varieties of coal. It's terrible. Okay, it's got a lot of sulfur, a lot of nitrogen, and it's acid rain causing coal. So there's lots of varieties of coal. You can't just lump them into one variety. But coal, there is enough coal. And so this is what is driving this, you see. So China adding, coal plants, like it's going out of style, India adding coal plants, and the United States adding coal plants. And nobody is planning to add nuclear, right? Because, even Germany was going nuclear, more and more nuclear. They canceled all the nuclear after Fukushima. They just canceled everything. The public doesn't want nuclear. France is the only solidly nuclear. Actually, France is a very good example of, they get almost 90% of their electricity from nuclear. Right. And actually, France's nuclear reactors are actually a great example of how to do nuclear, but the United States doesn't want to do it because it's too expensive. The upfront cost for setting up nuclear is very, very high.
So what is France doing that is so great?
Well, France hasn't done any new nuclear. It has had nuclear for a while, so.
Like a training program.
But it gets expensive, more and more expensive every day. And in the United States, it's very expensive because of liability. It is huge, right? Yeah.
How does France dispose of its spent fuel?
Oh, France has its fast breeder, which actually recycles its nuclear waste. So it has a very nice way of doing that.
Why can't everybody do it?
Good question. Expensive. Nuclear is very expensive to set up. It's the highest cost of plant setup. Okay, of all the different kinds of plants, power plants, nuclear is the most expensive. Okay, so this is I think. Oh, so everybody talks about clean coal. Okay, so what is clean coal? All right. This is it actually. This is actually a good definition of clean coal. Basically, just polish it up. Clean coal. There are two things about two varieties of main varieties of clean coal. First is to take the coal, gas, liquefy it, okay, and then use liquid fuel, okay, and they call that clean coal, okay, because they can take out some of the particulates, right? And they can take out the particulates from coal, and then they can use liquid fuel. That's clean, but it's not, ultra clean, okay, and it's expensive. And people don't want to do that in general. So coal will become non-competitive if they start doing that kind of processing. Okay. Now, the other form of clean coal is basically carbon sequestration. It is to have a coal burning power plant, but whatever comes out of the smokestack, take it, pressurize it, and pump it into the ground. Who wants to live near a power plant like that? Because what you do when you pump is you cause micro earthquakes. You screw up your water supply because it acidifies the water supply, and you cause a lot of pollution in underground water, and that goes into the rivers and messes everything up. Okay, so that's your clean coal. So clean coal, whenever people say clean coal, think about these two scenarios. Biofuels, and this is my problem with biofuels. Okay, if you talk about biofuels, particularly ethanol, land use, huge amounts of land required, chemical fertilizers leading to pollution in the rivers and the ground and the soil. So soil, it's single crop, usually corn or soy, right? Monoculture, which means Monsanto enters and ADM. Food and water shortages because it takes a heck of a lot of water to grow corn and soy, and it takes away from food supply. Okay, and is it really zero carbon? Not even close. Okay, so ethanol, biofuels, that's a problem. The efficiency of a plant to fix solar energy is 1%. So only 1% of all energy that falls of the plant can you recover back and when you burn it. Okay, a solar panel can give you as high as 10 to 12%. Right? So why have plants fixing solar energy for you instead of solar panels? Another issue with renewables that people have to remember always is that renewables, you don't find renewables anywhere, right? You can have a coal, Iowa doesn't have coal, but you can have a coal power plant here, correct? But you can't have a wind turbine in, in Arizona. It doesn't make any sense because there's no wind there. The wind is here. So you have to have the wind turbine here. So what does Arizona do?
So
If we're going to have all the wind here.
panels.
So Arizona can have solar panels. We can't have solar panels, but they can have solar panels. So now what happens is when you go to renewables, it becomes highly localized energy. So you have to have the energy where it is available. It's not available everywhere uniformly. Solar is here, wind is here. Then what happens is you have to have a smart grid to move the energy around. Okay, and our grid infrastructure is ancient. It'll take trillions of dollars to build the grid infrastructure. Now you move the energy around, and the thing is, if you take a look at wind power, there's a lot of wind power at night, less during the day. There's a lot of wind power in the cold season and less during the summer, the dog days, right? So there's a seasonal and daily variability. You take the solar power, there's no solar power at night, and there's none in winter. So now you have the problem, it's all hopscotch energy. It's localized in different places. It varies by day, by night, by season. And even in the day, the wind power, the wind goes up and down, so you don't have stable power. Imagine you're sitting in this room and the lights are going on and off, and you don't have light in the night. It's crazy, you see? So now you have to have a smart grid that is intelligent enough to mix the whole thing up. And that is very difficult to do. It takes infrastructure. It takes a lot of infrastructure. It takes a lot of engineering to make it happen, to move the thing around. It's not easy. Even with what we have today, which is fairly stable energy sources running 24 hours a day, we still have so many problems with the grid. Energy storage is a huge problem. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I've always wondered about that.
So basically now they store all the energy in the grid, which means that they basically ship it to a power station and store it, and then they ship it out. Local energy storage is quite difficult. Look at the solar energy distribution. Solar energy distribution is only, these areas here, Arizona, right? The Sahara Desert, and all the deserts have solar power. Nobody lives there. So now you can get power from the desert, but you have to ship it for millions of miles, of wiring. Okay, and that takes a lot of money. It takes $1 million per mile of electric wiring, high tension cable. $1 million a month. If you take the Sahara Desert, there is enough solar energy that if you take 1% of the Sahara Desert, just 1%, we can supply enough power for all of humanity. There is enough energy. It's a matter of harnessing it. Europe actually is investing a lot in the Sahara. They're buying up land in the Sahara. China and Europe actually own a lot of this part. And actually China owns a lot of this part as well in Brazil because they're producing their food there now. Okay, and other parts of Africa. Oh, Africa is up for sale. We could do it in Arizona, of course, we could do it. And there are people doing that. There are huge power plants. There are, multiple 100 megawatt power plants there that are producing power from the sun. I mean, in Spain, they have those kinds. In India, we have that kind of stuff in the desert. So there are people who are doing that, yeah, of course. And let me point out some things when energy comes up and we think about it, some things to think about. Real issues versus fake issues, okay? So, for example, when people talk about wind turbines, right, they talk about birds being killed, okay? And you know that I am averse to any form of killing of any species, okay? So, but still, let's look at the issue. The issue is that this is birds lost in action, okay? Annual bird deaths in Denmark caused by various things: wind turbines, cars, cats.
Oh, we have a cat problem.
Cats cause far more deaths of birds than wind turbines do. Right? But people will always talk about these birds running into wind turbines. Okay. Another thing here, this is a very interesting, unfortunately this is small font. Here is, this is the number of deaths per energy produced of various fuel sources, okay? Let me read out to you. This bar here is coal. This one is oil. This one here is oil. This tall one here is oil, okay? Guess which one is nuclear? So for every ounce of energy you get, nuclear has the least number of deaths of all possible ways of producing power. It is fair because it is per energy produced per year. Okay. Nuclear gets a bad rap, but it's actually the good boy in this whole. Let me mention to you how many people die in China every day mining coal. As many people die every day in China burning coal as in the United States in an entire year mining coal.
You are the best teacher I've ever seen.
Oh,
Do you have a car?
no, unfortunately I don't carry a card. I'm anti-business. Okay, transportation. This is the curve I want to show you. This is energy consumption per person kilometer. So this is a fair comparison. Okay, per person per kilometer, how much energy does it take? Right. I want to show you high-speed train full. This is speed. Okay, this is speed. How fast you can go. You can go really fast in a high-speed train, okay, and you are very, very low, okay. This is the Range Rover up here, okay. This is an ocean liner, QE2, okay. The so-called eco boat.
What is that?
That's some fast, really fast boat that is supposed to be highly hydrodynamic. It's right up there. Jet ski, train, electric high-speed train, diesel train, electric train full, bicycle. True story. This is true story.
Yeah.
Okay. Where are we here? We are nowhere here. Okay, this is the car, full car. It takes 20 times more energy than an electric train per person per kilometer. Well, again, if I had more time, I would show you these lectures, but I highly recommend these two lectures because Avery Lovins actually talks about what could we possibly do with where we are now heading into the oil end game. And David McKay talks about renewables, and he talks about it very intelligently, taking into account all of the issues involved in renewables. And one of the things he points out is when you talk about renewables, be prepared to sacrifice a large part of your land area to harnessing energy, because all renewables have low power density, which means that if you want to capture a certain amount of power, you need a very large area, surface area to capture the power. That's why wind turbines have to be so huge, right? I mean, they're now 100-meter span in their blades. The solution lies elsewhere. It lies in self-examination.